All right, today we're going to go over the introduction to our identity portraits printmaking project and go over how we are going to take inspiration from artists and fill out the brainstorming worksheets that you should have in front of you. So the first thing we're going to do is our art start. So take some time, give answers and examples of the following questions to inform your identity self-portrait. So go through these questions and just take note of whatever you feel best represents you in these different areas. Even if it's something you don't think you want to use, as long as you're willing to share it, go ahead and write it down, because the more ideas, the more self-reflection that you take the time to do now, the more ideas you are going to have as we start coming up with the actual imagery for your final self-portrait. So take a few minutes, pause the video, and write down some answers to these questions. Now we're going to go over some artist inspiration discussion, because we are going to be taking inspiration from artists. So we're going to take a minute to look at how artists take inspiration from each other. So on this slide, we are seeing work by Andy Warhol, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and a Juice WRLD hoodie that I have seen quite a few students wearing around the school, which is why I chose to include it as an example of inspiration. So on the bottom left, we see Andy Warhol, who I'm sure you heard of, and Jean-Michel Basquiat, whose artwork is all over our classroom, who were very good friends and inspired and supported each other's artwork. So on the top left, we have Warhol's very famous Marilyn Monroe pop art piece. These were done with a form of printmaking. So if you take a minute to look at the style, the simplified realism, that is a good example of how the techniques we're going to be using in this project. But what I want you to see here is Basquiat's Marilyn in the middle. So you can see that it was clearly inspired by Warhol's. The hair is actually the same. And if you look closely on the eyes and the mouth, we can see that same style, but it's very much a Basquiat piece. We have his layered painted background. We have his messy line work, and he signed it Warhol x Basquiat, crediting that he was using Warhol's work as direct inspiration and support for this piece. The bottom center is a portrait of Andy Warhol done by Jean-Michel Basquiat. So he was inspired by him as a person, as his friend, to paint. And I also want you to note here the crown above Warhol's head. So this simple line crown is a symbol that Basquiat repeatedly uses in his work. And that is what we see inspiring the Juice WRLD hoodie. In my research, I could not find direct confirmation that this hoodie design was intentionally inspired by Basquiat, but it's very, very often very common for merch, for music artists, for clothing designers, for all of our forms of media to take inspiration and concepts, ideas, imagery, all of those things from artwork, which is really what we're doing here. Now, these two artists are Claude Monet and Roy Lichtenstein. Claude Monet painted the top left and bottom right paintings, and he's really the artist who is credited with starting the Impressionist movement. And he is most famous for his water lily paintings and the Japanese bridge painting that you see in the bottom right. So Lichtenstein's work is the other two, and you can see that it was definitely inspired by Monet. They have very similar compositions. The angles of the water lilies are similar. You see the parts of the Japanese bridge coming through, but the style is drastically different. You would never mistake these artists' work for each other. even though we can see that they were intentionally using the same imagery. Lauren Brevner is a contemporary artist who was greatly inspired by the style of Gustav Klimt. They both use a lot of gold leaf in their work, and this very similar idea of painting a realistic or idealized figure where the clothing is turning into this graphic, abstracted, symbolic pattern. Next, on the left, we have Pablo Picasso, and on the right, we have Cruz Ortiz, who is a contemporary artist. Picasso created the style of Cubism, and his portraits during his Cubist style have the faces broken down into these really sharp planes and are using different angles at the same time. So in this work, you can see his face is looking to the side, but his eyes are straight on. And we see that same style used in Ortiz's work. He uses the sharp planes of the face and is using the different angles at the same time, while we also see this use of doubling the eye and other kinds of symbolism as well. We see how different styles, different techniques inform artists and inspire artists to use those same techniques and styles. Finally, with these Rembrandt and Franz Schmidt pieces, we are not actually going to use this style of inspiration in the project we're doing right now, but I do think it's important to understand. Rembrandt is a very traditional classical oil painter who does portraits. And they're very kind of refined and stuffy, like the one we see on the left, the man with the gold necklace. Franz Schmidt takes the imagery directly from the portraits. We can see that he has painted it himself. We see the differences here. It's not just a printout, but it is the direct imagery of Rembrandt's piece. And then he sets it against this kind of graffitied wall, obscures the face with layers of paint, adds the splatters, and actually changes this old school gold necklace up for a Chanel gold chain, which is a much more contemporary piece of work. Franz Schmidt titled this piece after Rembrandt, Man with a Gold Necklace, and that use of after Rembrandt, after the artist that they are appropriating from, is a common way of titling art when you are taking direct imagery from classical art for your own works of art. Now that we've gone over artist inspiration a little bit, we are going to look through 8 different artists' work. We are going to look at the ideas and themes in their artwork, the techniques they are using, and on your worksheet, you are going to write down for each artist ideas, techniques, imagery, whatever stands out to you from that artist. So you're going to take notes for each artist, but you especially want to focus on anything that you want to use in your own piece. So if you see ideas or techniques that you may want to use in your portrait, those are the things you really want to focus on writing down. But you should be writing down something that you see for each artist. After taking notes on each artist, spend some time going through them, going through your notes, going through the pictures, and circle or highlight on your sheet the things that you do think you want to use in your own portrait work. Our first artist is Jean-Michel Basquiat. And on each artist, you can either pause and take some time to go through and do your own interpretation. But since we did discuss these in class, I am also going to go over some of the things that I pull out of the artworks just to move us along. So in Basquiat's work, what I really notice is these abstracted, symbolic, cartoon-like figures. There's not really anything realistic happening in his work. I noticed the symbols, especially of the crown that we talked about before, and this layering of text and symbols and imagery in his backgrounds. In these two pieces, which we looked at, I really noticed in the Marilyn piece, the combination of more realistic elements in the hair, eyes, and lips with a more Basquiat style work of the almost messy lines. He has this really loose, even messy, expressive style. And in these two pieces, I also really noticed the backgrounds, these layered painted backgrounds, because we are going to be printing our portraits on different backgrounds. And you could certainly create some kind of painting like this background to print on top of. So these are a few themes and repetition ideas that I see in Basquiat's work that you could note: the text and layered elements, the symbols, and the loosening up, the messy, the free, expressive aspects of this piece. So you can note down any of these ideas, but also take some time to look through the works on your own and notice anything important that you see that I did not. Now, I included this picture as we transition from Basquiat and Warhol to Warhol, because this is a great example of doing more stylized portraits. This is the direct photo reference, and this is Basquiat's final portrait. So we see the inspiration. We see that this piece was used as a reference, but it's very stylized, very much in Basquiat's own style. So as you are creating your portrait, you can create a very stylized version of yourself. Even if you are working from a direct photo reference, you can still create a stylized version that feels more connected and personal to you. Now that I have walked you through looking at Basquiat's work a little bit, you are going to take some time to look at the rest of the artists on your own. So as I have the slides going through, as I'm talking, come back, pause on each one, or go ahead and click out of the video after you finish watching and go through the PowerPoint yourself. At the end of each artist, I do have a slide talking about different themes and techniques that I observe in their work, but feel free to note down anything you see that I didn't mark down, because I do want you to connect to the work on your own terms, even if it's not something I observed. Now, these are images of what my worksheet looked like after going through the same process I'm asking you to go through for your artistic planning. You can see the notes I took on each artist are super simple. I just wrote down keywords for the different styles and techniques I saw, and then I went back and circled the ideas that I was thinking about using in my own portrait. And where I had similar ideas marked down on different artists, I just connected those with some quick lines. So the distortion and deconstruction of Jenny Saville and the cut up faces of Roy Lichtenstein both really appealed to me for my stylized piece and are very similar concepts, how I'm thinking about working visually. So I just connected those to each other. But the main thing you want to focus on is just marking out which ideas you are planning on using in your piece. On the back of my worksheet, I started writing and sketching ideas for my piece, and I am creating two portraits as samples for you, one that is realistic and one that is stylized. You will just be creating one portrait, but you do want to think through multiple different ideas. If you are doing a realistic portrait and you already know which picture you want to use, just make some note to yourself indicating which one that is. So you can see in my top box, I listed references for several photographs that I wanted to choose between for my realistic picture. And then on the bottom, I started sketching out different ideas for my stylized portrait. And these sketches do not have to be good. They do not have to be refined in any way. Where I drew the more cartoon version of myself, I could just do that with a circle, maybe a line for which way I want the face going. And I wrote comic next to it to indicate to myself what I was thinking, just like I wrote Basquiat next to the one on the right. This is not a drawing test. This is just to visually think through and document your ideas so that you can look back on them and see how what you were thinking turned into your final version. For the backgrounds, make sure you're thinking broadly because we can print on a lot of different backgrounds. Again, you can write notes of what you're thinking or you can draw visually. At the top, I thought of different things that I could print on. I thought of places I might want to draw or print photographs of. I thought about printing on previous artworks, printing out things I've written. And on the bottom, I just started drawing designs and visual patterns that I may want to print on. So just write or draw anything you think you might want to use so that you have this to refer back to. After you have spent the time developing your ideas for your portrait and for your background, we're going to transfer it, carve them out of linoleum, and start designing backgrounds and printing. So remember, your backgrounds can be anything you have access to and can print on. And if you are going to have any realistic elements in your portrait, you need a picture of yourself. We need a photograph of you that we can print out. If you already have one you know you want to use, make sure you have it. Make sure you're marking down what it is. If you need to take a picture, make sure you are getting me or Mrs. Taylor or someone at home to get that picture for you so that we can print it out to work on these portraits. So let's get to work. Let's get designing. I am so excited to see what you all come up with.